think that you're just going to replace a wood stringer or a tread or handrail, and then the city's going to say, no, you need to bring the whole thing up to current code. It's going to require engineered drawings. And we used to be able to go down and say, oh, we're just going to replace this like for like, and they give us a permit. But those days are getting to be far and few between, depending on where you live. So to maintain a wood stair system usually runs about $25 a year, and I'll kind of show you what's involved in that. And to replace one due to lack of maintenance is probably about $3,500 to $4,500 to bring it up to current code and standards. So it's pretty expensive. And the steel ones are kind of the same deal, depending. A lot of the new ones have to have more foundation requirements, and so the city makes you put in intermediate posts with big footings, and so there's a lot of extra things that get in. So maintaining an old stair system and keeping that thing functional is a really good thing to do. So, and in some cities like San Francisco, they'll let you replace 50% of it a year. So if you have an out of code stair system, we just go in, we replace 50% one year, and we replace 50% the next year, and you have a whole brand new stair system without having to bring it up to current spec. These are the areas, and may have these concrete or wood treads up against the wood stringer. These little areas right here are a real problem. A lot of debris will collect down in there, dirt, leaves, and once that gets down there, that gets wet, the moisture just hangs there, and then the bolts underneath will start to rot out. And so these are areas, that, replacing the stringer is usually like $1,200, but, if you can actually keep these areas clean, this will last a lot longer. Sometimes we'll even come in and actually take all the stair treads out. We'll make sure we prime and paint behind here, treat it with some things, and then put the stair treads back in to keep the system maintained. Yes, sir.
We have, I think, building codes around here that whenever you're taking siding off, like shingles or anything, they have to sheet it and use a vapor barrier. Now, is that Tyvek? Does that stuff breathe to keep this dry rot from happening?
Yeah, Tyvek is probably, Tyvek that we usually see, wasn't used a lot in Northern California. We have a different, every kind of climatic zone is a little bit different.
I see it used a lot, and I know, of course, in the pharmaceutical industry that I'm from, the Tyvek breathes, but I don't know if it's the same kind of Tyvek we used to use.
It's supposed to breathe.
I thought, because you're right, that condensation is worse than if you just let the water in.
Exactly.
It happens every day.
Yeah, well, the houses, like I live in a house that was built in 1922, and I have, there's no wall insulation. The house, if there's a windstorm, I get a draft through my living room, and everything breathes marvelously. Well, also the wall cavities breathe and everything else. So even if I have leaks or something, nothing dry rots out because everything's, breathing, it's all drying out. And then the newer homes keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And so we have all this vapor drive through the walls and everything else now. You've got tight windows. It's a whole, you're dealing with a whole different thing, versus a home today versus a home from even 10 or 20 years ago.
Well, the original construction of we have single-family homes, there isn't any vapor barrier. If you take the shingles off, you're looking at the studs. Okay?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but what a lot of folks, like on the southern side, which gets, UV a lot, they'll tear that off, but then they're putting vapor barrier on. And I'm wondering if they're not going to cause a problem. In other words, breathing is healthy in one perspective, but not in another. So I was wondering, because they use that Tyvek all around, just maybe one wall. Now, are they going to cause problems in that wall in the next 5 years?
They could, and that's one of those things you need to be careful when you're recladding your buildings and putting in new double pane windows and all these different things that happen when you start changing the design of the buildings. They have, they call it a WOFI model, where these engineers can actually take the system of your building, and the other thing is the mechanical components inside. Your hood fan, your bathroom fans, your HVAC systems, because what happens during a big storm is you create this bubble of negative air on the outside of the building. And if you're inside, everybody's inside, and they start turning on the bathroom fans and the hood stove, and they run the furnace, it starts sucking water. You create this pressure where you start drawing water into the house because the house is so tight. Now, the old houses leaked so much that you didn't have that issue. So we've seen a lot of issues where, association will go through a major reconstruction project, put all these great components on the outside, but nobody takes this whole vapor drive and negative air thing into account. And it's a huge issue. So, just like you said, you substantially changing the way that building was originally designed. It probably performed beautifully for a number of years, and then...
If you have no choice, if it's a codes.
No, and San Francisco is probably the most notorious city we have for they'll enforce something one year and then they change their mind 2 years later. So it used to be we'd pull off stucco on a 20-year-old building and they'd want us to put pressure-treated plywood. Well, I remember when that code came out and they started requiring us to do that, I said, well, that's got copper in it, and that's why it's pressure-treated. And so we're going to put on this last system that's stapled to it with galvanized nails, and eventually the nails will rust and the stucco will fall off. So, as a matter of fact, I think for 5 or 6 years, we just said, we'll use stainless steel nails only. And they finally did, 5 years later, repeal that because of the issue. Stucco started falling off of walls, huge sheets of it. So, so the building department's not always right. The other big area, the problem with these wood stringers is a lot of times they just come down on the concrete. There's landscaping around them, dirt will collect, and then you get a lot of dry rot right at the bottom of these stringers. And that's probably the most common problem I see on the older properties. So this is the kind of the area. So there's a couple different ways to deal with it. If this hasn't gotten too decayed or too dry rotted out, we can actually cut the bottom of this off. There's a couple different ways of putting on brackets or a different thing to stage that off of the concrete to protect that, so it doesn't decay. Here's one. This is where we're trying to deal with a code issue. So this was Santa Clara, and there's a building right here, and they only have like a 3-foot wide sidewalk. Well, the new code would make this come out one more stair width. Well, we don't have room for that. And they'd also make all these, they call it closed riser systems, where you have to close all these off. And we were going around and around and around with the building department. So we had to, this thing was all dry rotted at the bottom, and we had to do something. It was not the most attractive solution, but we basically cut it off, poured concrete, put a box with a bunch of steel in it, and then put a concrete footing at the bottom, so that we could at least save these right now. I don't know what they're going to do in the future, because eventually this will have to get replaced, and I'm not sure whether they're going to have to do a switchback into the landscaping or something, but it's going to be one of those things where sometimes your existing buildings don't allow you to bring things up to current code, and municipalities, can be very difficult with that. We had an issue over at the Keys in Walnut Creek. They're doing new roofs, and they have sliding glass doors that go on these little roof decks. Well, they needed to raise the door up because they don't have proper slope on the old roof. The city of Walnut Creek says you can't have the step out. And went around and around with them forever on whether they're going to be able to keep their patio. And of course, everybody had a patio deck wanted to keep their deck. So it's sometimes the cities can be a little difficult. Okay, the metal stairs. I've got a single stringer. These little connections right here collect a tremendous amount of dirt and debris. And same thing with the wood. That debris sits there, collects water, and it starts rusting. You can see where it falls. And I see these all the time. These concrete treads that are welded on right here. And this area is pretty critical. And I can't tell you how many times we'll get the call, from somebody on the weekend. Well, somebody just moved out and one of the stair treads came off because they were rolling a refrigerator down it or something like that. Pretty significant. So this is an area that, really easy handyman job. Go clean all those out, prime and paint them, and keep them maintained to keep this thing from rusting out and the concrete from small. When you start getting spalling and things like this, it's very easy to have somebody come weld a new tread on, but do it before it comes off, because this can be pretty serious. And you'll be calling Darren and Jennifer because there's a lot of so. And here's what the new systems with the code. The other thing you get into is the handrails. Everybody go through the code handrail upgrades with their insurance carrier probably over the last 10 years. One of the things that happens with a lot of people is the insurance company came out and talked about the picket spacing. Its code used to be 6 inches and it went to 4. The one thing that nobody ever talked about was space underneath. So I still go out to a lot of communities where this gap underneath is way beyond 4 inches. So those will be the next things you guys have to deal with. But this was coming in and replacing, wood stair stringers and stuff like that with a steel system. Anybody have waterproof coated decks, balcony decks?